Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a graphic novel that I read. I am back on that graphic novel comic book grind, and I wanted to focus on a story that is about a mysterious swamp creature as well as a city that has been turned into a jungle. I am referring to the Saga of the Swamp Thing, Volume 5 by Alan Moore, with art by Rick Vetch, John Totleben, Alfredo Alcala, and other people as well. I've talked about Alan Moore on this channel before, so I don't need to go too much in depth, but he is a comic book writer, and he's written some other non-comic book and graphic novel related stuff. He's written Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Swamp Thing, From Hell, many others. He is considered one of the best writers in the comic book world. I am a big fan of that, and he also frequently talks about fascism, and he tries to dissect superheroes in his work, which I'm a fan of. This was actually a booktube challenge from my friend Lucas over at the Bits of Lit. We were reading the Saga of the Swamp Thing series together, although I don't think he ever ended up talking about Volume 4. He might have stopped doing that because he got busy with work or whatever it is he's doing in Shanghai, China. But I am very much interested in getting to the end of this series because I know Volume 3 was pretty amazing. Volume 4 was a bit hit or miss for me. Like it was good, but it didn't reach the heights that I thought it should. But Volume 5 was definitely an elevation of the series for a number of different reasons that I'll talk about in the analysis section. But I definitely recommend that you read this series if you haven't done so already. And I'm hoping that Lucas will see this and finally get around to reading Volume 4 and 5 and talking about it on his channel. So without further ado, let's talk about Volume 5. Here I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Volume 5 of Swamp Thing picks up where Volume 4 left off. Abby Arcane has been arrested and is set to be put on trial for crimes against nature for having sex with Swamp Thing, because it turns out some journalist got a picture of her with Swamp Thing and published it in the newspaper. And now Abby is being shunned by her family and friends, just having an all-around rotten time, and she decides to just skip the trial, flee from justice, and head to Gotham City, where she tries to lie low, although it seems like the police in Gotham catch up with her pretty quickly. Meanwhile, Swamp Thing is just finishing up his battle in heaven with good versus evil, and bidding farewell to Constantine. And when he gets back to Earth, he can't find where Abby has gone, but he does eventually go to her apartment and sees that she has been arrested, and this makes him incredibly angry to the point where he's ready to straight up fight various human beings and deliver as much justice as possible. He even goes to Gotham City, getting into Arkham Asylum and asking Jason Woodrue for his help, although I think he eventually decides against it. But Swamp Thing manages to track down Abby to the courthouse that she's at in Gotham, where she's going to be extradited back to Louisiana. But Swamp Thing shows up and gives Gotham City an ultimatum: either free Abby Arcane, or he will destroy Gotham City eventually. He will hurt people if he has to. He will do what he needs in order to prove his point. And he begins just covering Gotham in a bunch of vines and plants and all sorts of things like that. It's clear that he's holding Gotham hostage. Meanwhile, the government wants Alec Holland dead, or Swamp Thing dead, because in Volume 1 he killed the wealthy industrialist who was investigating his body after Swamp Thing had died the first time. And the government believes that he has secrets that Swamp Thing and Abby shouldn't really spread around, so they're just planning on killing him in some way. And Gotham continues to be a wilderness, which attracts a bunch of hippie types, some people from Swamp Thing's own past who want to be on, or want to announce that they're on his side, and some people learn to adjust in this strange new world in Gotham. But it's very clear that the police aren't happy, and neither is Batman, who shows up in the middle of Gotham and begins to fight Swamp Thing. Batman gets the upper hand by using a flamethrower at first, but Swamp Thing quickly creates duplicates of himself and beats the ever-loving shit out of Batman in an amazing fight scene, which I highly recommend that you go and check out if you can find this. It is pretty well written there. After beating Batman, and after Batman saying he doesn't want to lose Gotham, so the government should give Swamp Thing what he wants, the government eventually decides that they're going to free Abby. However, when Abby comes out of the courthouse, Swamp Thing and her embrace, and the government shoots him with a dart that prevents him from entering into the green, and then they throw a bunch of napalm at him, which presumably kills him. Because Swamp Thing can't enter into the green, it seems that he is dead there. And Abby falls into a great depression and is left in mourning of the person that she loved. Meanwhile, while she's mourning, she runs into Liz Tremaine, who we hadn't actually seen since Volume 1 of the series. She's been held sort of prisoner by her demented husband, who believes that Sunderland is going to come back, the wealthy industrialist, and terrorize them. But Abby realizes that this man is demented, and so she helps Tremaine or Liz escape. But and they manage to kill, or the alligators manage to kill her husband in the process, and she helps Liz get over this hostage situation that she's been in for quite a while. Then she goes back to Gotham for Swamp Thing's funeral, where the people of Gotham note, especially Commissioner Gordon notes that although he terrorized the city, what happened to him was unjust, and so they're mourning him at this point. Batman even shows up to the funeral, but not too many other people, as Swamp Thing was hard to get to know by Abby's own admission. Abby kind of just notes that she'll miss Swamp Thing, but perhaps she's hoping that there's a better world for him out there if he managed to make it to heaven or some other place. And at that point, we learned that Swamp Thing, although he was not able to enter the green, his consciousness was thrown out into the universe, and he ended up on a strange blue world where he was able to manipulate the plants and the energies there. And in his grief of missing Abby, he recreated Abby and Humus in Louisiana, the city that he was from. But he quickly learned that it was him making Abby do things. So he's manipulating it, and he's growing very frustrated and not being able to actually have Abby. And he decides in his grief that he's just going to throw himself into space because he doesn't want to be alone anymore. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with Volume 5. I think Alan Moore does a lot worth considering here. He touches on relationships and philosophy. I don't think he talks about identity so much as he did in previous volumes, which is good. I was growing tired of talking about identity anyways. Although there is a lot worth exploring with identity, which I'll mention later, just based on some of the few ideas that Alan Moore presented. But one thing that pops up is Swamp Thing and Abby. Alan Moore does a lot of work in exploring more of their relationship, which I'd say was kind of left on the back burner of previous volumes. I really wanted to know what Swamp Thing thought of Abby and what Abby considered Swamp Thing to be, because I know they both loved each other, but I didn't know the extent of it. And I think Moore does a lot of work here in helping us understand how much they love each other and the extent of it, because it kind of seems mostly sexual. And Moore points out, no, it's more than just a sexual sort of lust-based relationship. They seem tethered to each other, where they really need each other. I don't think it's codependent, but it's clear that they, like both of them are lonely, and they've come to rely on each other for providing one another a company. They don't like to be away from each other for too much. Like without Swamp Thing, Abby has no one, because everyone in her life has died or has tried to kill her or has been stolen away or hiding from her. So Abby kind of needs Alec in order to feel like herself and to have someone to talk to. Meanwhile, Swamp Thing is Swamp Thing. The only thing that's really tethering him to this reality is Abby. And when Abby is taken away, he is immediately driven to vengeance mode, where he starts trying to destroy everything, and he's promising destruction towards human beings. And we're reminded of like Jason Woodrue, because he visits Jason Woodrue in Arkham Asylum, noting that like in Volume 1, Jason Woodrue tried to destroy all of humanity. And it might be the case that the only thing that prevents Swamp Thing from turning into a murderous rage monster that wants to punish humanity for its crimes is Abby Arcane. The existence of this great human being is enough to remind him that humanity should not be punished for its actions. And we're even given a further insight into this relationship after Swamp Thing's apparent death, because neither of them seem to be doing too well with one another. So I do like how Alan Moore goes in depth in this relationship, highlighting how much they need each other, how much it's more than just sexual, and what each of them are willing to do, or what they're feeling when the other one isn't around. Related to that relationship aspect, Alan Moore talks a lot about grief near the end of this particular volume. So both Abby and Swamp Thing are dealing with the loss of their loved one. With Abby believing that Swamp Thing is dead, and maybe he is dead because his body is gone and it's just his consciousness thrown out into the universe. So for all intents and purposes, there is no such thing as Swamp Thing anymore. I would argue that's another point to be made entirely here. And like Swamp Thing is greatly missing Abby because like he has no way to make it back to Earth. Like he can try to recreate Abby on this planet, but it's not quite the same. And if he throws his consciousness out into the world, how many years is it going to take to find the right planet with Abby on it? It could take hundreds of years, and by that time Abby will be dead, unless something magnificent happens to her that results in her immortality, which, given how this series has progressed so far, isn't that much of a leap. So Abby's kind of lost in her memories of Swamp Thing, and very heartbroken, not really able to burst free from this sadness that she's enmeshed in, kind of feeling like as she notes, like everyone's trying to find someone on this planet of Earth, trying to fall in love or something, and then we end up losing those people after we cling to them, and that just results in heartbreak. Alan Moore saying a lot of interesting things about the chaotic nature of the world here that I think is some really quality writing on his part. And again, like as I mentioned before, Swamp Thing is desperate to recreate Abby and his old life, but the more he looks at it, the more he realizes it's just him manipulating the plants and whatnot, or whatever's going on this planet, and it's not quite the same. It's just him doing a little bit of wishful thinking, which is sad. And so he decides like he decides to go to another planet, but he's feeling a lot of anguish. Both of them are feeling a lot of anguish and kind of diving deep into delusion. showing that grief is possibly not the most rational of emotions, and how like in our grief we feel so much stronger emotions, and we have a difficult time dealing with our memories and dealing with the reality that is set before us. There are other great things about this volume. I do like the sinister writing that Alan Moore does here when he's writing Swamp Thing making his way through the green to Gotham. It like it's written like something terrible is coming to Gotham, and nobody is prepared for what's about to occur. And just being in the mind of Swamp Thing as he prepares to possibly destroy this city for what he perceives it is doing to the woman that he loves. It's really quality writing, and we get a different perspective of Swamp Thing, possibly a more villainous perspective, whereas before we had seen Swamp Thing through the eyes of noble intentions and whatnot. So being able to shift those views is something that I really like from Alan Moore. And then the Batman fight, of course, is some pretty quality writing as well as some really good art, which you've probably seen throughout this this video that I'm making. So really good there. And then just seeing Gotham surrounded by like plants and whatnot, making it look kind of hellish at times, is definitely one of the better sort of illustrations, some better art that I've seen in this volume that I think is worth seeking out. And then there's also the philosophy that I was talking about earlier, where I think Alan Moore is talking a little bit more about identity here, because now not only is Swamp Thing, like he's on another planet entirely where there aren't really what we think of as swamps. So he's so far removed from the original Alec Holland identity that like he's starting to bring up like, what does it mean to be like a person? What does it mean to be certain person? And like, if your consciousness were to shift and move elsewhere, would that be you, or is this you? And again, he's been exploring this throughout the entire series in a bunch of very interesting ways. So like this has been a very fascinating sort of exploration into the mind. The one problem that I have with this particular volume is it does seem that Swamp Thing's immediate return kind of undermines the grief. And while the funeral chapter was happening in this collection, I was kind of thinking, okay, just show me when Swamp Thing comes back. So kind of like being able for your character to come back so often and not having life or death, it kind of undermines those really tragic moments, because like Swamp Thing isn't a traditional like human being who can die, and therefore death has stakes. It has the regular comic book problem of kind of undermining those tense moments or sad moments by knowing that this character might just return. Of course, that's not necessarily bad, because Swamp Thing can return, but the question is, will he end up with Abby? Will he be able to find her before she dies? And that's not really known there, because Swamp Thing is lost in space, and who knows if he's going to be able to shoot his consciousness across the universe in order to find Abby on Earth again. So I think that's really what the stakes might be. And so I think Alan Moore does a great job of still presenting some sadness and some unfortunate moments in this story here. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Swamp Thing Volume 5 by Alan Moore. A really good installment in this series. I really enjoyed what Alan Moore had to say about, again, identity and the relationship between Swamp Thing and Abby, as well as what Alan Moore had to say about grief. If you haven't read this series yet, you obviously don't start with Volume 5, but definitely I encourage you to start reading from Volume 1 because it's worth it to get through the entire series, especially to Volume 3 and Volume 5. A lot of quality writing here. Alan Moore has definitely taken an existing character and elevated it in a way that I thought was really possible before, but he's showing like his legacy, or not his legacy, but he's showing what he brings to the comic book table, not only with his ability to create like new characters and work on that, but also taking existing characters and adding a new spin on it. So I think that's really cool. If you read this before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Volume 5. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this series if they do not already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and swampy travels. Farewell.